What's going on, guys? Today I want to talk about my top 5 September lures because the month of September can be a tricky one. You still have deep fish, but it's also early fall depending on where you're at in September. And so I have a few different baits that I really think is going to help you break down September a little bit easier, varying from largemouth to smallmouth and everything in between. So stay tuned, you're not going to want to miss this one. So I'm going to break this video up into two parts. I'm going to do a largemouth part and a smallmouth part. Still only top 5 baits, so it's going to be a few largemouth and a couple smallmouth. But we're going to start with the largemouth first because I think that affects the majority of people more. So we're going to break down my largemouth first. And the first bait that I want to talk about with my largemouth is going to be a topwater frog. So topwater frog this time of year can play huge because those fish are starting to push up shallower and get back into those grass mats as bait fish start to get up shallower, and it just seems like the grass bite starts to turn back on this time of year. And so that's why I always have a frog on top of my deck, because it allows me to cover so much shallow cover and just be real versatile. Whether I'm fishing lily pads, whether I'm fishing matted hydrilla, or just topped out grass, I can skip it around docks. I can really do whatever I want with it. Because this time of year I really like to be versatile because I don't know what type of cover those fish are going to necessarily be keying in on, but I know they're going to be feeding up pretty heavily, and so I want something that I can throw in all types of cover and still be efficient and still draw bites. And especially a popping frog, because it's going to draw bigger bites because it's going to have a bigger fish presence. So I always have one of those on deck. And again, guys, I'll have all this stuff linked down below like I always do, but let's get into bait number 2. So staying with that largemouth grind, my bait number 2 is going to be a punching rig, and that's going to go right along with the frog. This time of year, still, those fish are in that grass, and it seems like that grass bite is really starting to heat up. And what you have is you have grass dying back, which is a really important part of this year, or this time of year, because as that grass starts to die back, those fish are going to start to cling to the leftover grass that's still there. And so you can get on some really big schools of fish in some small patches of grass. And that's something that is super fun to me, because throwing a big weight is something that I personally love and enjoy. And so anytime I can pick up this big weight is going to make me a happy camper. And so one thing that I also note about this is that it always gets, not always, but it seems to get bigger fish on average. When I get into there and get into that thick stuff, it seems like I can catch numbers and also have the chance at a true giant, which is something that I always love to do. I know you guys do too. Anytime you can get a big fish, it's always a bonus. And so this allows me to cover all of those grass mats, which is going to be ideal for most of the fisheries around the country. If your fishery doesn't have grass, then you can probably just throw this out the window because it's really not going to affect you. But the next bait is. And so the last 3 baits are going to be either species. It can be largemouth, smallmouth, spotted bass, etc., but they play a role nonetheless this time of year. And so the first one that I want to talk about is going to be a drop shot. You can see I have the leader cut really short right here. That was for filming purposes, but a drop shot is going to be something that I'm going to keep in my hand pretty much all fall long, because what it does is it allows me to be super efficient whether you're smallmouth fishing or largemouth fishing. And it could be whether I found a group of fish offshore and I'm trying to finesse them a little bit with a worm for largemouth, or it could be throwing some finessier baits out deep for smallmouth, or even covering shallow cover with it. A drop shot is probably one of the most versatile tools out there, and nobody can really argue that. It's the one bait in your arsenal that you can move horizontally or move it vertically without having to move it horizontally. And so you can really get a lot of extra bites and really cover a lot of water with a drop shot. And it affects everybody around the country equally, whether you're a Great Lakes guy or whether you're a Florida guy. It doesn't matter. You can catch fish with it anywhere you are. And so that's why that has to be in my arsenal, because I can fish that bait from 40 feet of water, 50 feet of water, all the way up to 2 feet of water. It doesn't matter. And so I always have a drop shot on deck. The next bait is going to be one that has taken the industry by storm the last couple years. It's even got a Bassmaster Classic under its belt. It just got an opens win. That is going to be a Dimiki Rig. It is a bait that has really proved itself in the industry this last couple years, and really has been super versatile for me as well in being able to cover water and catch fish that really otherwise are uncatchable. We saw Gussie do it at the Classic, where he was catching fish around all these other guys that were trying to do what he was doing but just simply couldn't. And so this bait is going to be in my arsenal because you have those fish chasing bait fish, and so you still have bigger fish out roaming, whether it's in the middle of pockets chasing bait or whether it's a shallow fishery and they're just kind of cruising around. You can use your active target, your Panoptics, whatever you have up front to try to look at these fish and see where they're at. You can also blind cast this down steeper bluff walls as those fish are starting to push back into creeks, and it has just done a phenomenal job whether you're looking at them on a graph, whether it's your down imaging looking for smallmouth out deep, or casting this over suspended fish to try to draw some strikes on fish that you typically normally would not ever get to bite. And so I like to use this bait bait to target those fish that are out roaming in open water, because it's a bait that really has minimal action and is just something that those fish haven't really seen in a long time. And those suspended fish that were typically impossible to catch can now be targeted accurately with this bait by casting it out and keeping it over top of their heads. This really is a clear water technique. I don't ever break it out into dirtier water, but it's just something that I always like to keep with me if I ever see this scenario and have everything line up, because it's something that I always throw for suspended fish, but I have to be able to find those suspended fish first in order to catch them. But a Dimiki rig is something I'm always going to have on deck. I like the scented jerk shads because it kind of adds that little bit of an element to it, and again, I'll have all that stuff linked down below. But it adds an extra element when those fish are chasing bait and they're really wanting to key in on your bait. They can get right up behind it, and that scented jerk shad is going to have that scent in there. And so if those fish are really finicky, it just adds that extra sense where they can really key in on it and just kind of close the gap just a little bit more. And I like the ZMan minnows heads. It has a keel shape on the bottom, which is really important if you're throwing this, because the way this bait works is when those fish eat it, if you're using a ball head, a lot of times that jig head will have a tendency to roll in their mouth, and that's something that will cause you to lose bigger fish, not necessarily smaller fish, but the bigger fish you'll lose because they have flatter mouths on the inside. And so that's something that you want to pay attention to when you're picking the right jig head. That ZMan scented jerk shads comes in a 4 and a 5-inch model, both of which are really awesome. They just recently came out with a 3.5-inch, but most of the time I'm going to stick with that 4 or 5-inch because it represents a bigger bait fish and helps me get a little bit bigger bite. And so the last bait that I want to use in September is going to be a bait that is not going to surprise anybody whatsoever. That is going to be a ZMan Jackhammer. That's a bait that I have in my arsenal and on my deck probably 365 days a year, and it doesn't matter whether I'm smallmouth fishing, I'm largemouth fishing, whether I'm up on the Great Lakes, or whether I'm down in Florida. It just seems to always be a player in my arsenal. And this time of year especially, because we have the shallow grass fish starting to pick back up, we have fish chasing bait, and so I can change out this one for a white and chartreuse one and do the exact same thing and cover a ton of water. And we all know a chatterbait just seems to get bigger than average bites for whatever reason, and I'm not really sure why, but it just always seems to help you target a bigger fish. And I think it's because of that vibration, and that blade just has a bigger fish presence in the water. And so that's something that I always have tied on my deck. I throw that on a 7.4 moderate action rod. This is an Arc Invoker Pro. Again, I'll have it linked down below. But it's a rod that really helps me because it's a graphite rod, and you want something with a little bit softer tip, but still have that backbone to be able to hook those fish and drive that hook home and really get those fish in the boat. And that's a big deal for me for smallmouth as well, because I find that you can get away with a stiffer rod for largemouth, but when you're fishing for smallmouth, you want a little bit softer rod because those fish don't have as big of mouths. A lot of times they're coming up behind it and trying to hit it as hard as they can. So if you have too stiff of a rod, it's almost like you bounce them off, where they come up and they get skin hooked, and as soon as they jump once, that hook is coming flying right out of there, and then, you know, obviously you cry a little bit just like I do. But I keep that on deck, and specifically I keep it at a 1/2 and a 3/4. I don't like to go down to a 3/8 because for me it just doesn't make sense. That 1/2 I can do everything I need to do with it, cover it much more water with it, get more reaction strikes, and that 3/4 is going to be something that I really love to throw because I can do a lot with that as well. I don't really keep the 1.25 ounce on deck too much this time of year, but that 3/4 plays for me whether I'm fishing grass or whether I'm fishing ledges. Just it plays in a much deeper role because we still have fish coming to us, which is what you want to remember. It's still early in the fall. The fall transition really hasn't gotten into its full swing no matter where you're at in September, and so you really want to be cognizant that most of those fish are still getting up shallow. And so that's why I had a mix of shallow and deep baits here. That drop shot being able to cover out deeper, along with a 3/4 ounce chatterbait. That Dimiki rig helping me find those finicky fish, which is what you're going to have out deeper, because this time of year those fish have been the most pressured they're going to be the entire year. And so then you have the frog and the punching rig for when those fish are up shallow in that shallow grass, which is something that you're really going to want to pay attention to because you can get on some amazing bites this time of year. Everybody raves about the Guntersville grass bite this time of year, whether it's a frog, whether it's a punching rig, and that plays across the entire country, not just Guntersville. So if you guys enjoyed today's content and you want to learn a little bit more, I'm going to have a video up here where I talk about what you need to know about cranking grass, or what the pros don't want you to know about fishing grass. And that's something that I think is going to help you come to the fall. That's something that I think is going to help you with this fall transition, because a lot of it relates to grass, and I think you can really learn a lot from this video. So go ahead and check that one out. Don't be afraid to smash that subscribe button to follow on with the content. But God bless you guys and take care, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.